Hello, welcome. It's Thursday night, 7 o'clock, and you know what that means? Welcome to Getting Carried Away with Norry and Caig, our YouTube channel where we talk with authors about their favourite things that make them get carried away: books, TV, games, and music. Welcome.
Hello. Well, this evening we are absolutely delighted to be joined by Sarah A. Denzil, who is a million copy best-selling author of magical novels. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well,
Hello.
I was trying to count your novels when I was. How many is it that you've got out now? Is it nearly 20?
I've got two pen names. So for Sarah Denzil, I think it's 16, with some short
Amazing.
stories and things like that. And then my young adult books, about 10? No,
Oh,
not that many.
wow.
No, I can't remember.
I don't know if you don't know. I was trying to count them. I was like, "Oh, I'll count them for the intro," and it's like it's just amazing, really
That's
impressive.
loads. And how long a period of time is that over?
The first thriller, which is Sarah Denzil, came out in 2016. But the young adult stuff I started in 2012, so it's my 10-year writer anniversary this year.
That
That
Happy
is so
writerversary.
impressive, Sarah. And they're really good as well. Like, I know we give you a little bit of time at the end to kind of chat through what you've got coming up and stuff, but it is, they're really good books as well. For anyone who says you can't write good books fast, I think you really disprove that.
And there are a lot of people who are much faster than me as well. So yeah,
That just puts me
in
to
the
shame.
self-published world, I think it just shows how writers actually can be
Yeah.
very fast. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of the time writers are maybe held back a little bit by publishing schedules, that they can only release one book a year or one book every 2 years. Not for everyone, but
That's really
yeah.
interesting. Yeah, I'm so pleased you've come on tonight. I've wanted to interview Sarah for ages, and you've picked three really, really good choices, including our first repeat choice. So that's going to be really interesting to chat about something for the second time. It's the first time it's happened. But I think, well, let's kick off with that, shall we? That would be a really nice one to start with. So tell us what it is that you love about Buffy the Vampire Slayer and what it means to you.
So many things. I think it's so entertaining for a start. It's really funny. It gets very, very heavy. There are a lot of very heavy themes, but it's done in such an entertaining way that you just kind of roll with it, and you suddenly realize that you're like watching a TV show that handles grief and depression and loneliness, but it's never heavy-handed and it never feels labored, and it's just such a fun show to watch at the same time, and it just has all these different layers that you can kind of peel if you want to, or you could just watch it as this snarky girl who goes around killing vampires as well. So it's just great on every level, really.
Have you always been into it then since it came out?
No, not really. I think I was like 12, 13 when Buffy came out, so I would watch the odd episode. But I never got into it because I think in the 90s, if you missed an episode, you'd just miss an episode. So you'd never really pick up the storyline. I think that's why we had so many shows that were just kind of monster of the week, because they knew that people would sort of dip in and out. But yeah, and I think I was at uni and I started watching the repeats a lot. And then in my early 20s, mid-20s, I binged watched the whole thing, and that was when I realized this is actually a really, really good show. And I got really into it then. And I kind of rewatch every now and then now.
So how many times have you rewatched it? I know you post about it on your Instagram, don't you? It's always because I'm not really. I've watched a few episodes, but I'm not massively into Buffy. But I still find your Instagram posts kind of reflecting on it and kind of talking about how you're responding to it now. They're always really interesting.
Yeah, I think I've rewatched it 3 or 4 times. There are actually shows I've probably rewatched more, but I feel like Buffy resonates more. Like I've watched Friends so many times just because it's always on TV and it just has that nostalgic feeling. But I would never say I am a fan of Friends, but not in the same way as Buffy, even though I don't watch it quite as often. It just resonates so much more. And you do have a different lens every time you watch it as well as you get older. And now I'm starting to see that maybe Xander isn't like the most he's a bit of he's what you would call a nice guy now. I think he's kind of he's that guy who wants to be Buffy's boyfriend and he's quite possessive and jealous about it. And you start to realize, oh, actually, he's not that great a guy. He's developed as a character. He's still an interesting character, but when you're 20 or whatever, you just think, oh, Xander's hilarious. I love Xander. And then as you get older, you're like,
You kind of start seeing him in a different light.
Yeah. So yeah, I do like that, picking up on little things that you wouldn't have noticed the first time around.
Yeah. So you still love it just as much. You just maybe love slightly different things about it when you rewatch it. And
yeah, and I think you can accept things that you love are flawed as well. So I don't feel like Xander is written to be. I think he's written as a good guy. It's just that at the time there were certain biases about what a good guy is, and especially
that's interesting.
Yeah, he's kind of the avatar for Joss Whedon as well, who is, we found out he's pretty toxic. Let's put it that way. So yeah, so you pick up on these different little nuances that you wouldn't have noticed in the early 2000s or the late 90s.
And is there any special? Oh, sorry.
Go on, Emma.
I was just going to say, is there any, when you rewatch, do you like rewatch from the beginning or do you pick out certain episodes? And is there anything that prompts like a rewatch where you think, oh, I really need some, I need some Buffy now kind of thing?
Oh, sometimes you just see someone post something like an outfit and you think, oh, I remember Buffy wearing that outfit, and then you suddenly just watching the whole thing. I do think the fashion is one of the best things about the show as well. Yeah, she just encapsulates late 90s, early 2000s fashion to me, and I always wanted her wardrobe. I always wanted to wear what she wears. But I try and watch it from the beginning, but there are episodes that I skip because they're just a bit, they were fine, but you don't really care about watching them 5 times. The kind of monster of the week sort of thing that is kind of a forgettable storyline and doesn't really affect the rest of the storylines in the show. So yeah, I do kind of skip a few every now and then.
So you skip them because you don't like them, not because they're like, oh god, that one's really going to upset me if I watch that one again, or
oh, there is one that is very upsetting, and sometimes I do skip it. It's called The Body, and it's when Buffy's mum dies, and it's all focused around the death of her mum, and it's kind of about I think the writers said that they wanted to show how the kind of almost boring side of what happens when someone dies. Like you have to speak to the paramedics, you have to do the paperwork, and it's just a very, very like kind of gentle and quiet episode, but it's just absolutely devastating. And a lot of people just say they can't watch it because just showing that side of death and it not being dramatic, but it just being devastating is really, really hard to watch. But I did watch it again this time, and it was just as devastating as the first time I watched it. But it's probably one of the best hours of TV as well. It's just so well acted and written, and yeah, and you don't expect that level of quality when you're watching a a fun show about vampires. If they just kind of slip it in there as like you not notice it
Yeah.
the first time. But yeah, there are a
So
few I
which
don't
for
like as
people
well.
like me and Emma who kind of know a little bit, because you know a little bit, don't you, Emma? But not
Yeah,
loads, is
but
that
only
right?
only a bit. So yeah, when we had our previous guest who's a huge Buffy fan, we watched, didn't we? I think we watched like 4 or 5 episodes.
Yeah,
But then I decided there was just too much of it. It was just, I didn't know, it was too long to
yeah,
commit to, like, what is there, 7 series or something, 7
there are,
seasons?
yeah, and it's
Yeah,
the long as well. They're 22 episodes a series
yeah.
as well. So
God.
yeah,
So I definitely would watch more, and I quite enjoyed what I saw. But something that's so meaningful for so many people, I kind of can't believe that I just missed that whole. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just
yeah,
missed that whole thing. Missed all of Buffy.
yeah.
But yeah, like, yeah, I kind of, I don't know. Have you got kind of favorite seasons? And
Oh, I really like the first seasons where they're in the school.
okay,
It starts when she's I don't understand school system in America, but you know, like a senior or something. I don't know. But she's around 16, 17, I think, at the beginning. So she's at school for 2 seasons and then she graduates. No, she's at school for 3 seasons, then she graduates and goes to college.
okay,
And those are just the most nostalgic seasons for me because even though I didn't really watch it religiously when it was on TV in the 90s, I did used to dip in and out. So it does remind me of that time.
mm,
And then I think it's season 6. It just gets very, very dark. And a lot of people hate it. They find it too dark and too depressing. But I love that season. I don't know what that says about me. But yeah.
what's dark and depressing about it? Is it the themes and stuff, or is it just like more blood and death and mayhem?
It's mostly the themes. There
Okay,
are actually quite a few there are quite a few humorous episodes, but the whole season is about Buffy actually dies at the end of season 5, but
okay,
her friends bring her back to life at the beginning of season 6. And she's
mhm.
just very, very depressed, and they don't really understand why. And then it reveals that they pulled her out of heaven. They thought she was in hell, but she was in heaven and she was at peace. And they brought her back to the world, and now she feels like she's in hell. It's like she's gone from heaven to hell. And that's kind of what the
Oh,
season's about. And
okay.
it's really interesting.
Hmm.
Is
And
that the
yeah,
season with the musical episode in?
yeah, it is.
Yeah, 'cause I remember her saying something like that in that one. That was one of
Yeah,
the ones that we've watched.
yeah. That's the
Mm.
reveal. That's when she first tells her friends, no, actually, probably was he probably should have let me die.
Oh.
Oh no.
Are there any other episodes, or do you just think so for people like us who are like, "Oh, we should probably watch a bit more," are there particular
Mm.
episodes you'd really recommend, or do we just need to kinda start at the beginning and just blitz it?
A lot of people skip season 1 because they don't find the quality quite as good.
Okay.
So maybe the season finale of season 1 kind of
Ah,
shows you what
interesting.
it's about. That's her first big battle kind of thing. So maybe that one. Hush is always one that people really enjoy. It's very creepy. It's the episode where they don't speak, and there are
Oh,
these
Okay.
creepy
Yeah,
yes.
men.
that was mentioned before, didn't it? That came up before, I
Yeah.
think. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Oh, and definitely. Oh, I would say there are 2 episodes called Becoming Part 1 and Part 2, but they're probably my favorites. But I feel like you need to watch the full season of that arc to
Yeah.
get the emotional payoff at the end. Um, she's in a relationship with a vampire, but he has a soul. But then his soul is taken away and he becomes this really nasty, psychotic vampire. And so that whole season plays out and it's really tense.
Mm,
And
Ah.
that's a good season.
Which one's
Season
that? Is that
3.
okay.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Oh
what
no,
Definitely.
is I
yeah.
mean, go on.
It just sounds like it's one of those things that it just sounds like the more people talk about it, the more I'm intrigued. But I'm a bit like
Yeah.
I would need to commit from the beginning. Do you know what I mean? I'm
Yeah.
like, hmm,
You could
maybe one
probably
day.
skip season 1, I reckon.
Okay.
I feel like I will definitely watch it one day. It really sounds like my cup of tea, but I just
Yeah.
a bit like you, Emma. I'm like, how did this just pass me by? Like, this is clearly something I would really enjoy. I know loads of people who absolutely love it,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
somehow it's so one day I'll have my like, oh, I've got no
2
plans for a
months.
whole yeah.
Yeah, there's a spin-off as well. So if you really want to go deep into it, you can watch the spin-off
Is that the
too.
Is that
angel?
Angel?
Yeah, yeah.
What do you think
That
of
is
that
the
then?
Vampire of the Soul. He gets his own show.
Ah, gotcha.
Which the Angel series is good, but it's not quite the same as Buffy. It's not quite as layered.
Okay.
And there is one really bad season, which I wouldn't recommend watching. Yeah. If I don't know if you have ever with the Joss Whedon controversies, one of the actors came out and said that he treated her really badly when she was pregnant, and
Okay.
that's the season, the really bad season of Angels, because she was
Oh.
pregnant. They wrote this different storyline, and
Oh.
I get the feeling that the writers, especially Joss Whedon, was just really mad at her because they just annihilated her character.
Oh
Oh
Which
no,
is
that's
just
horrible.
awful. Yeah.
And it's really bad, I guess, because it's really inconsistent and
Yeah,
terrible, and
it's
she's
just
acting out of character and all that kind of stuff, is it?
absolutely, yeah. And then he sacked her, the actress. Yeah.
God.
I know. It's pretty bad. I just read a book about Buffy actually, and it was all about the behind the scenes stuff, and it was
Oh yeah.
very, very interesting. A lot of competitiveness between the cast. They were overworked. Yeah, it just sounds like it was an absolute nightmare.
Did it
So who
become
wrote it? Was it someone who really knew what they were talking about, or is it?
I don't really know why he wrote about Buffy, but I think he's a journalist and he just happens to have a lot of connections. So he interviewed the whole cast and got their take on what it was like to film Buffy. He interviewed Sarah Michelle Gellar and most of the main cast. And yeah, there were some everything was very vague. They didn't really mention names, but you could figure it out. You could there was some good gossip in there anyway.
And
So
was it huge when it first came? You know those series that kind of when they've got a really young cast or quite a young cast.
Yeah.
Did it become massive as soon as it came out?
I think it was quite big, but maybe because it's a fantasy show, it just never quite got to the level where it would win awards or anything like that. I think it was kind of maybe kept in sort of nerd culture. So while it was really popular amongst people, I don't think it ever really got recognition or awards or anything like that.
Yeah.
So what is it we can kind of neatly segue into
easy.
one of your other choices? But so you've obviously got a thing about vampires, and so first of all, tell us about so your second choice is Dracula, and we're talking about the book Dracula. Is that right? Is it?
Yeah, although I have seen quite a few of the adaptations. I've seen
tell us what you love about Dracula, and then we can sort of explore vampires and.
And where did your love for all things dark and bloodsuckery come from?
I don't know.
It must have started somewhere. Like, unless you're a little baba gnawing on a rat in your cot. Like, there must have been something must have started it. Was it music, or were you a bit of a goth, or do you know what I mean? Like,
I did go through a tiny bit of a goth phase. It wasn't really goth. It was like, those big skater trousers.
Oh yeah.
Them and chokers.
Chokers. I could never pull off a choker. I love chokers. Oh my god, they're gorgeous.
Me too. I loved a choker.
I rocked one once, and it was like just a black velvet strip, and I thought like, I thought I was the boss. Like,
I loved the 90s chokers, but I had my neck was a lot thinner then, so they look better. Now I can't wear them now. But those interlocking plastic ones.
I think that's what I saw this and it was like a young, cool person wearing a choker today. So we can bring them back.
bring them back.
Yeah, you just used to stretch them over your head and like try and get your hair out of it, like all tangled up. Yeah,
That's why they didn't. That's why they didn't work for us, Hannah, because we could never get them past like our curls. That was it.
Sexy
Yeah,
hairy hookers.
I think I first read Dracula for English A level, and I had to compare it to Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen.
Oh,
And I absolutely hated Northanger Abbey. But I loved Dracula. I just really loved rich descriptions, and there's a lot of drama in Dracula. It's almost like reading a soap opera at times. It's just so dramatic. I loved Wuthering Heights as well, so I think maybe the darkness came from A-level English.
Yeah.
I don't think that was what they were intending to go for, that they'd turn young girls into goths or whatever, but
so it's lots of yeah, I was just going to say, because you're a massive Wuthering Heights fan, aren't you, Anna? So is it just that really rich, lush landscape and kind of full-on passions that...
I think it is. I think there's something weirdly subconscious about vampires as well. Like it's kind of it kind of elicits some kind of subconscious fears about many things. And I also am a bit phobic about blood and needles and things like that. So I think it kind of taps into the subconscious fears about that kind of stuff. And once you've got that connection, that subconscious connection, you kind of don't let it go. It's kind of resonates, even though it's something that you're afraid of, and you think that you would avoid that kind of literature because you're scared of it, but you end up being drawn to it.
Oh God, absolutely. I can relate to that. I reread it. So I was like you, I read it years ago when I was quite young, but knowing that it was one of your choices, I reread it a couple of weeks ago, and it is amazing. Just what a book.
Is it? I've not read it. So go on. What?
It's just like it particularly. I thought the first third. I have to say, I think the first third is phenomenal. Like you'd struggle to find a better, more gripping book. Full stop. I think it's just like the whole section of Jonathan traveling to the Count's castle. That whole section where the Count then sort of stows away aboard a boat, doesn't he, to come to Britain, and that whole section is just one of the most incredibly written, vivid, gripping, dramatic, exciting sort of few chapters. I think in all
the diaries,
stunning,
the captain's diaries, and everyone's kind of dying one by one, and it's so creepy.
And then they arrive at Whitby, and he's like the corpse of the captain is the only person left, but obviously he's dead. But his corpse is tied to the ship's wheel. I mean, it's just brilliant.
Yeah, it's really.
So what's the story of it then for like me, the uninitiated? And so I mean, obviously everyone knows, loosely the story, but of actual Dracula the book, what's the sort of, how did we start? Because why is Jonathan going to the castle anyway?
He's a solicitor, and he's there to help Dracula purchase property in the UK. So he goes over there to sort of talk about his finances and do all the legal stuff. But he ends up kind of being trapped in Dracula's castle, and Dracula is just sort of roaming around being a lunatic, talking about the wars. And Dracula's wives or sisters, who are the Twisted Sisters, the vampires, they kind of try and seduce Jonathan. And then there's a weird bit where Dracula climbs down the wall of the castle, which really freaked me out.
That's creepy.
So I think then Jonathan manages to get back to the UK, and he's back with Mina, his fiancée. At the same time, Dracula comes to Whitby, and Mina's friend begins to act strangely, and you realize that the vampire is turning Lucy, Mina's friend, into a vampire. And from there, it's really just like they get the team together.
Yes.
They organize this team of vampire hunters, Van
Okay.
Helsing, Lucy's suitors, who I can't remember all the names of at the moment. And they want to avenge what happened to Lucy. And that's when they start tracking Dracula down. And it
Okay.
becomes quite like a cat and mouse kind of story to the end. But I would agree, the first third is probably the best part of the book. And then the last third is maybe the weakest.
Yeah.
But it's such a suspenseful book. It really is. It's really quite fast paced as well, even though it's a long book.
I love books like that. I love books where you know what you're reading, you know what the document is you're reading. So it's like a combination of diary entries and letters and the captain's
really
log, and it's all actual documents. I just find that there's something really satisfying about that, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I know some people just can't get into books that are like diary entries, but I just found it fascinating. And I think my favorite parts are Mina's diary entries. She's just such an interesting character to me.
Yeah.
She's a really good female character, and it's strange to get such a complex character written at that time. She's very clever, and she really does a lot of the tracking when they're looking for Dracula. She organizes all their travel, and they all they regard her in such high esteem as well.
Yeah.
While at the same time, there's no real romantic interest. She's just part of the team. She's a friend who they rely on. So yeah, I've always, and I feel like every film version I've seen of Dracula, they never get Mina's character right, because
that's interesting.
Yeah, they always try and create some kind of romantic interest between her and Dracula, but there's nothing in the book to that.
Yeah, she wouldn't go near him, would she? She wouldn't even think.
She does sound pretty sensible.
Yeah, yes. It's not really to be advised, is it? Because when I started this reread, I have to say I did have Winona Ryder in my head, because probably that's the version I watched the most. But you're right, pretty soon that just goes, doesn't it? Because you're like, this is not that character, this is a different woman.
Yeah, I think Winona was really good, but that storyline of her and Dracula and that kind of reincarnation, that she was Dracula's wife when he was Vlad the Impaler, it was just didn't enjoy that bit.
From the story that you've recounted, like, just actually what happens, from all the versions, like the film versions or TV, sounds like what the what the League of Gentlemen guys did a few years ago. Do you remember when they had that? That sounds like they were quite close with the physical events of what happened. That sounds. What did you think of that?
Oh, the BBC series.
Yeah, sorry, it's the guys who did Sherlock.
Yeah, I know who you mean. I thought you were talking about there was like an extraordinary League of Gentlemen film that I think had a couple of Dracula characters in. But I did watch the BBC version, and that really, really annoyed me.
Did it? Why did it annoy you? Because it was on, wasn't it? It was about 2 or 3 years ago, because it was all over Christmas. Because I remember
they invented this strange nun character, who's not in the book, and she's very prickly and she's very kind of smug. She's an interesting character, but I just felt like, why not just use Mina? Because she's such a good character in the book. She was in the first episode, and then they killed her off, and I was just kind of like, that's me gone. You need a good Mina if you're going to do Dracula. And then it came into modern times, and the modern times part of the story was a little bit cliched, and it just kind of fell a bit flat. I think the BBC one. I think they're doing a new Dracula film. I think they've been making one, but I'm not sure who's in it.
No, I don't think I've seen that.
I may have read somewhere that it was Nicolas Cage. So
oh god.
That could go either way.
Be
amazing.
I'm leaning more towards like
Are you?
Bad, but I don't know. Well, his new film sounds really interesting. That whole, him sort of playing himself. That sounds quite mad. So
Oh
yeah, we'll
yes, I want
see.
to see that. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
that
that'd
does
be.
sound quite crazy.
He's such an eccentric person, so
Yeah.
and quite funny and self-aware. So I'd be interested in that, I think.
So what
Yeah.
film versions or TV versions of Dracula have you really enjoyed, do you think?
Well, I think even though it's really flawed, I do love the Francis Ford Coppola one because the
Yeah.
costumes and the set
It's
and
Gary Oldman, isn't it? It did look
yeah,
amazing. Yeah.
and sort of 80-90% of the film is true to the book,
Okay.
and the costumes are just so beautiful. It's a shame about Keanu's English accent.
Oh god, it's really bad, isn't it?
Yeah,
Okay.
you have to see it to believe it.
Yeah, I might have to look up a clip later because I can't remember it. Just
Oh,
he's not
no,
very good
you
at
are
accents.
right.
Full stop, is he?
No.
I always want to leap to Keanu's defense. I love him so much.
Yeah, no, he
but
is wonderful, but
that is pretty fair.
Yeah, I think the fact that it's Keanu makes it better, but his accent is so bad. Bless him.
Oh, well, let's say I'm not only we're running out of time, but because I couldn't find my plug to plug in my laptop. So if we don't, I'm worried we're going to run out of charge if we don't. So let's ask you about your final choice, which again is something I know almost nothing about. I feel like all of these TV choices are things that make it seem like I never watch any TV because I don't know them. But so your final choice is Game of Thrones. Tell us what you love about Game
Yeah.
of Thrones.
So no vampires, but lots of blood.
Lots.
So much blood. If you don't like blood, Sarah, you must just
I know.
we watched the whole season like that.
That's actually why I didn't watch Game of Thrones to begin with, because I knew it was
Okay.
really gory, and
Mm.
I tended to avoid really gory TV at the time. I'm not quite as squeamish as I was then, but people just kept going on about how good it is. I'm not really a fantasy reader, so I didn't really expect to enjoy it. And then I watched the first few episodes and I realized that the dialogue and the story is really, really good. And there were some lines of dialogue that I'm not really someone who remembers quotes, but I remember those lines of dialogue, and that doesn't really happen very often. They're just so good. The characters are great. Yeah, it's genuinely a good show. For the most of the time anyway. And I think Game of Thrones was the first TV show that I got really into while it was still on air.
Okay.
Came into it, I think they were on season 4, season 5.
Like the Red
So I
Wedding kind
caught
of
up.
all that bit.
Yeah, sometime around then. I caught up to that point, and then there was just loads and loads of YouTube analysis videos, predictions, and I started getting really into them. I had all my own predictions in my head. Was convinced there was going to be like a massive twist at the end, or all this stuff would happen. And then it just kind of the ending just kind of happened.
Were you not a fan of the ending?
It drove people mad, didn't it?
It was so
People were
bad.
literally like rioting in the streets. Like,
Yeah.
it was really full on.
Are you into Game of Thrones, Emma?
Yeah, I really, really enjoyed the series. So I don't read fantasy, and I hadn't read the books. And a really good friend had read a couple of the books. And so when we first started, I think we had to watch the first episode like 3 times or something. Do you know what I mean? Because there's so many characters introduced and it's so complicated. And I was like, I've forgotten, because it's like 7 kingdoms, and isn't there like, and however many families. And I was like, who are the Lannisters and who belongs to who? And there's too many people. There was like 2 people look the same or whatever. But Sarah's right. The characterization and the dialogue is absolutely brilliant. And
it really is. Yeah.
Oh my god, so brilliant. And you just feel so much passion for certain characters. Absolutely amazing, and genuinely kind of like a few of those, especially kind of that whole Red Wedding season 4, end of season 3 or whatever, beginning of season 4, like proper jaw drop moments of TV. Do you know what I mean? Where you're like, oh my god, I literally can't believe it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we weren't watching it live. We were watching it. We buy like the box set off eBay, watch it all in like a week, and then sell that box set and buy the next. Do you know what I mean? Like that's how we were doing it.
That's
It's kind of,
clever.
yeah, it's kind of weird. So we came to it a few years later when quite a few things were out. But I probably, because there were such long gaps between each series, or when we were watching it, we did then have to go back and rewatch the last few episodes of because there's so much to remember.
There is, yeah.
And I don't remember being massively disappointed with the ending. I do remember thinking, it's a bit, is that it? But I wasn't like taking to the streets. Do you know what I mean? But people were like, what did you think, Sarah? Were you just like, did you think it was awful or?
I did. There'd been so much build up to the
Okay.
White Walkers, and they didn't explain anything about them.
Yeah.
There were scenes where the White Walkers stole these babies, and they went into like a castle of other White Walkers, and so they obviously had a home.
Yeah.
And they must have communicated with each other, and yet they remained silent, and they were killed off with just like within 30 seconds.
Way too easily. This massive threat that had been there from like season one. It was this really menacing thing that you really wanted to know about their history, didn't you? You kind of wanted to invest in them. And it
absolutely. Yeah.
Ended up feeling that last season ended up feeling very separate.
It did.
To me,
it was
like the dragons and then the White Walkers, and then it all felt quite. It didn't.
It's a bit of an anticlimax.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, it just didn't weave together very well, I don't think.
No. I think, and the last season, there wasn't much dialogue at all. It was just these action sequences with things stitched in, and there was you didn't really know what was going on in the characters' heads. Poor Jon Snow had 3 lines of dialogue throughout the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that really annoyed me was Daenerys and how they suddenly twisted her into this evil character. It wasn't even nuanced. She just committed a genocide at the end for no real reason. And it felt misogynistic to me, actually, watching it, especially when she's paired with Cersei.
Yeah.
The only other sort of big female character at the end of the series who was already she was more nuanced, but she was nasty and she would kill, anyone who crossed her. So the main female characters were just these they became one-dimensional evil people at the end, and that wasn't what the show was about to begin with.
What have either of you read the books? How closely does the TV series follow the books? Do you know?
I've read the first 3, I think, or 3.5. I slowed down because I was really hoping he'd finished the next one so I could carry on. And then no, I mean, I don't think that book's ever going to come out, if I'm honest. I felt like the first season especially was very, very close to the first book. I think they do deviate in the fact that they don't have as many fantasy elements in the TV show. There is a lot more magic in the books. Apparently, the showrunners of the TV show wanted to appeal to a broader audience, so they didn't do as much of George R.R. Martin's fantasy stuff. They kind of left it out, and they also left out a big storyline in the 4th book that I haven't read yet, regarding Dawn, the area like to the south of Westeros, where there was the Prince of Dawn, and Oberyn was from there. Well, in the books, there's a huge storyline about that, and I think that becomes very important. And there's this other character who gets introduced, and he's not in the show, and it sounds like they kind of merged that character and Daenerys together in order to finish the series. And it just didn't work. They used to do that a lot. They'd merge characters together in order to not have to introduce new characters.
I mean, it's a massive cast, and it's really complicated, if that makes sense.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Yeah. So I can, yeah.
I watched a few of the like trailers and stuff just in preparation for this. One of the things that I really liked is how many northern accents there were. There's loads
Yeah.
of northern accents, and they have properly northern accents, don't they? It's like,
Yeah.
yes.
Well,
Apparently
Sean
they
Bean's become
Yeah.
famous, hasn't he, for like bastard and all that's that whole Sean Bean thing that's taken on like a life of its own, and like him in a cloak and saying, yeah.
I think they cast Sean Bean first, and then they just told everyone to do Sean Bean's accent.
Amazing.
Everyone's from Sheffield.
I was going to say, so the whole thing, they did actually, because Sarah doesn't live very far away from me. Haven't they filmed some of Game of Thrones quite close to us in Derbyshire?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't know that.
I
I
think
know they
they
filmed
filmed
a lot
some.
in Northern Ireland. But...
I think they filmed some near Castleton, like
Oh,
near
right.
kind of Winnett's Pass, and
Oh, right. I could imagine that. Yeah.
I possibly dreamt that, but I think that's right.
Wish fulfillment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, but I would really like to watch a bit of that, but it's
For
like
characterization and dialogue, there are just so many strong characters that you feel so passionately about, and
Mm.
also that you just really hate to start with, because they're, they commit incest and whatever, and then they go on a
Yeah.
real believable journey to become, I don't remember everyone's names, but Jamie and is it Tyrion?
Yeah.
I mean, just
Yeah.
just brilliant. That are really believable and so complicated and nuanced until like the last series, probably. In which case you're like, he would or she would never do that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I
think
did read
maybe-
something where George R. R. Martin was saying like all of his characters, or he tries to make them all shades of grey, like no one's ever a goodie or a baddie, and
Yeah.
because that's how it is, people when they're in these big conflicts, nobody sees themselves as a baddie, do they? Everyone always thinks that I'm
Yeah.
really justified in what I'm doing, and he tries to sort of show that. So
Yeah.
I think that does sound really
Definitely.
interesting.
Yeah, he's really good at writing grey characters. I think he does sometimes go a little bit too grim. I think his fantasy subgenre is called grim dark because it just goes really dark and depressing. But for me, like Ramsay is we could do without Ramsay.
Is Ramsay
We don't need Ramsay.
the dog's evil with short black hair? Ramsay. Oh god,
Yeah,
Jesus Christ. He was, oh my god, yeah, so many feelings. Yeah. Oh, bad Ramsay.
Yeah, we could have done without Ramsay and maybe, more Sansa or someone makes,
there was a Littlefinger, and they were just some great, really complex, really brilliant characters.
So good.
Yeah.
And I must admit, I've not watched it since it finished because I was so disappointed with it.
Maybe you need to give it another watch.
Maybe.
It'd be quite interesting actually to watch it again, because I've only watched it once, all the way through. But when you watch it just to experience what's happening, but then you watch it again to kind of analyze it, I'd be interested to see, if and why, it started to go wrong, if that makes sense. When you start to go, oh no, that's just too rushed and whatever.
I think it was a gradual thing, and I think I didn't notice it. But I think if I watched it again, I would start to notice, like, oh, okay, that's not quite how that. I did start to notice the dialogue around season. I can't remember how many seasons there were now. Season 7.
I want to say 6, but it might be 7.
I think there was 8 seasons, and
okay.
Season 7, Daenerys just goes, enough with the clever plans, and I just thought, enough with the clever plans.
Okay.
That's really modern speech. I just
for Mother of Dragons, that's a little bit like
no. And someone said something about a top knot, and I was just thinking, top knot?
No.
They got lazy, didn't they? They just wanted to take the cash and run. They got
Or maybe it's an expectations thing. Maybe if you watched it again and your expectations weren't as high, I find that really affects things.
Yeah, I just wish that they'd at least kind of tied things together. Like if they'd kind of run out of steam, and maybe George R. R. Martin didn't give them too many notes that they could actually use. just find a way to tie everything together in a nice little bow. And yeah, they didn't do that. I don't know. They threw a lot of characters under the bus in order to create like a big visual thing, I think.
Yeah, they definitely went for style over substance, I think. I mean, I wasn't massively disappointed with the end, like I said, because I think, Anna, you're right. I didn't have any expectations, but it definitely just felt a bit lacking. Do you know what I mean? Like, it just felt a bit like, it's not quite right.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, when you've got such a passionate, kind of engaged and invested fan base, you kind of think you do owe them something.
Yeah,
you do
you've got to get it
some kind of
right.
satisfaction, and
yeah, and other shows manage to do that when the showrunner stays committed and passionate. I think the writer of Breaking Bad had already planned everything out, so I think that's right. So he knew where it was heading, but would sort of adapt along the way as well. I think it's a very hard thing to end a TV show. I would not want to have that responsibility.
Yeah.
But there
are some writers who stuck to their plan, to their own, and then it fell apart because they stuck to the plan. Like How I Met Your Mother. Did you watch that?
No.
But they always had this plan that the ending was going to be. I probably shouldn't spoil it because we've not put spoilers on How I Met Your Mother.
Right.
But yeah, they had this plan about who the main character was going to end up with on the last episode, and they forced it in, even though by the time they got to that last series, all the characters were completely different to what they were like at the beginning.
Oh, no.
And it just all fell apart at the end. It was kind of a similar Game of Thrones situation there, but for the opposite reason, that they cared so much that they wanted the ending that they'd initially planned.
Okay.
Even though the characters had just already gone a different direction, they should have adapted to it and changed their ending.
Yeah, they would have taken on life of their own by then, wouldn't they?
Yeah, exactly.
The actors and.
So you wouldn't do that with a book, would you? I guess if you're writing a book and your characters develop as you're writing, you're going to think, okay, actually, my original plan for this ending is just going to feel really fake and weird. I'm going to go with it, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's probably quite hard even to do that with a book when you're so determined that it's going to end this way.
The first book I wrote, I just stuck to an ending. I clung on to this ending for like 3 years.
Yeah.
And then it just took so many people that kind of, had my best interests at heart, just friends. This book hasn't been published or whatever. Just to say, you need to give, this main character deserves a more positive ending. You need to give him a lovely ending. And I was like, no, it's about this. And then and eventually it made sense, but you needed such distance from it. Does that make sense? Because it was a totally completely different ending. You needed a lot of space for me to accept that actually, everything that person had been through, they actually needed to have a different outcome. It's quite, so for a TV show and a big TV, big ensemble TV people working together, you would imagine you'd want to be more flexible and more kind of like.
I think with Game of Thrones, they could have benefited from more writers, to be honest, at the end. I think the two main showrunners kind of took over the whole last season on their own. They needed a more diverse writers' room in order to finish off that story, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My laptop is actually flashing red at me now. So you should
quick log off before you just die.
Yeah, those are 3 amazing choices. But yeah, so tell us what you've got coming up, Sarah. What book? So the one of yours that I read was My Perfect Daughter, which I would massively recommend. It was so twisty, so satisfying, and definitely grim, but in a really
in a really nice way.
Not in a nice way, in a satisfying, twisty, really interesting way. But you've written another one since that, haven't you?
Yes, but it's not coming out until later this year.
Okay.
That book I actually started last year, and then I got halfway through the draft and I gave up on it, and then I picked it up again this year. It's set on Christmas Day, and it's about a wedding venue with 3 different weddings. And there's a murder and all kinds of crazy things happen.
What's that one
But
called?
it's called Find Her.
That sounds
Um,
brilliant.
yeah, and I think it's going to come out in November, so
Okay.
just in time for Christmas, because you want it to be wintry when you read this one, I think.
Yeah, I'll definitely. I felt bad that that was the first one of yours that I'd read, and then I read it, and I was like, why haven't I read more of these? They're so good.
Thank you.
So if that, so then are you already writing another book to come out after Find Her? Then are you sort of always 2 ahead, or?
No, I'm really quite disorganized mostly. This is only ahead because I had that long break. In fact, I was supposed to finish it for last Christmas, and I didn't. So I decided to finish it for this Christmas instead. But I have been working on a co-written book, which might come out before Find Her. So we'll see. It's a TBD at the minute. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
And then I will be working on something else after that. But
Oh.
not really got any concrete plans at the minute.
Well, I think if you've written, was it 26 books in 10 years? Is that what we worked out it was?
Something like that. Yeah, something like
Yeah,
that.
something like was it 10 young adult?
I think so.
Is that different?
Yeah.
Is that a whole different thing then? A whole different.
I used to write young adult dystopia. In fact, I used
Okay.
to write a few different genres in young adult. I did some young adult dystopias, some young adult horror books with ghosts in them,
Okay.
and a little fantasy trilogy as well. Yeah, it feels like a lifetime ago now. That was under my real name, Sarah
Okay.
Dalton, if anyone wants to read them.
Cool.
But I am thinking of revisiting the first book that I ever wrote, which is young adult dystopia, and just seeing like maybe I can tweak it a little bit, make it a bit better. I've learned a lot more about the craft since then.
Yeah.
And I self-published most of my books, and this was the first one, and I didn't have any money, so there was no real proper editor. It was all beta read. So I just feel like maybe a little breather from the thrillers and go back and do a little
That'd
bit
be
of
a
editing on that
really,
one.
yeah, it'd be
Yeah.
amazing to see kind of what you could do with the first
Yeah,
one
yeah.
ever.
Yeah, it'd
To
be
be
a
honest, I
really
think you should have a
nice
year
to do.
off and just put your feet up and
Yeah, it sounds like by your output that you write in your sleep, like just
I
got your
really
hands
don't.
like.
I really don't. That's the funny thing. I feel like I have a lot of time off. I did
oh,
quite a bit. I did like a full month off around Christmas just because of writer's
nice.
block. It wasn't an intentional
Okay.
time off. But yeah, I don't feel like I'm not a workaholic, I promise.
So yeah, I would really recommend My Perfect Daughter, and we
I've
will
got
look out
the
for.
Oh
copy
yeah,
of that
hold it
one.
up.
Oh,
Because I read
Close
it
it
on
right
my
up.
Kindle, so I've not.
Nice.
Yeah, and
It's
we'll
a
look
good
out for
cover.
Find Her in November.
yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Sarah. That's been brilliant. I'm so
Thank
pleased that we got to
you.
interview you.
No problem. It's been fun.
Yeah.
I,
Lovely. It's
yeah,
great talking to
any
you.
chance to talk about Buffy or Game of Thrones.
There's a
Oh,
lot of Buffy love on this show.
there
There's
is.
a
We
lot of
need to
Buffy
get
love.
involved, don't we? We need
We
to.
do. We need to see it. We need to see it.
Oh, well, let's say goodnight anyway before my before my laptop cuts us off anyway. But thank you so much to Sarah, and we'll be back same time next week for our final episode of the second series. So we're interviewing romance author Lorraine Brown next week.
Lovely.
All right, take care everyone.
Bye.
Love
Bye.
you.
Love you.
Bye. Love
Bye.
you.